In this video, I'm going to show you how to turn a basic top safely from start to finish. For this, we're going to use 4 tools. First tool we're going to use is the skew chisel. This is just a basic skew chisel. This one's a Sorby. You can use any kind. Another tool we're going to use is a spindle roughing gouge. You can use any kind again. I like to use a 3/8 bowl gouge for shaping the top, but you can use any other kind of bowl gouge or any tool that you feel most comfortable with. You'll get to know it as you go along. And then I also like to use this 3/8 beading and parting tool for eliminating the waste behind the top. So we're going to start with a blank. This blank is a 2-inch square piece of maple, about 4.5 inches long. And the first thing that we need to do with this is make it safe by turning a tenon on it. I have Novichok here. You may have a different kind, so what I'm going to show you is compatible with my chuck. Your chuck may be different, so read the manual. First thing we want to do is turn a tenon, because if we don't, we may get a blank to the face. We don't really want that. And the way this happens is, if you'll notice, right here you can see the edges of the jaws contacting the blank. This blank is nice and square, so for the most part the jaws are contacting all the way around. But they're not all contacting equally. They're not making perfect contact with the wood, so there may be some looseness here. In addition, you might not have a completely square blank when you do this. In that case, you would see one of your jaws probably not making full contact. But in general, turning a top this way, with just the edges of the jaws contacting, is a pretty quick and easy way to get a blank to the face. So I would recommend against that. Second thing is, while you're turning this tenon, while you're making this tenon, it's probably a good idea to use the tailstock for support. Myself, I don't use the tailstock anymore because I've developed my own technique that I feel comfortable with the risk level of. But in your case, if you're a new turner, or if you've never turned a top before, I would recommend using the tailstock when you start. So that's just the safety piece. And of course, I've taken my ring off. You always take off your jewelry, any other material, and of course roll up your sleeves. Alright, so now that we're safe, let's go ahead and get started. What I'm going to use first is this skew chisel, and for my chuck, the angle of the skew chisel creates a pretty good tenon. That ends up being a very good angle for the Novichok. It's about 12 degrees. But in your case, you'll want to read the manual and make sure that you're making a tenon that is compatible with your chuck. To start with, we're going to make sure that the blank spins. We're going to turn on at a low speed, and then we're going to ramp the speed up. I'm going to come up to about 1500. And you can see this sucker is kind of wobbling around. I want to be very careful on my first cut especially. And what I'm doing here to shape the tenon is scraping cuts. I'm not doing planing cuts because those could cause catches and get me, again, a blank to the face, and I really don't want that. So I'm coming in with a scraping cut, and what you can see that I'm doing about an eighth of an inch to start with. That's a very light cut. And I'm going slow. I don't want to take any heavy cuts here because, again, my blank is not that well supported. So I want to be really careful here. So I'm going to take another tiny bite, an eighth of an inch bite, come in to the same level as I had before. And then I'm going to do one more. And that gives me maybe a quarter of an inch depth. Last thing I'm going to do is just take a tiny nibble right off the end here to square that up. Not completely necessary. I just kind of anal about it. Alright, so now I've got this with a nice tenon on it. You'll notice that it's not completely round. That's okay. What we want is the jaws to be contacting the part that we've made round and completely round, so that it's got a well-supported edge all the way around. We also want a nice clean shoulder for the chuck jaws to contact on the far side. We don't want to go too deep here. We don't want the blank to be touching the bottom jaws, the bottom of these jaws, because those are not always true. The bottom of this is maybe not necessarily true, and also the chuck is not designed for that. The jaws are not designed for that. They're designed in a dovetail shape. So now I'm going to turn this sucker around and I'll feel very comfortable turning it with the tenon. Okay, now that it's secure, and just one extra bit here, I want to make sure that the part that I turned, the tenon, is actually contacting the jaws. I wouldn't want this edge to be sticking out in between this because, well, that wouldn't be quite right. All right. So now that I've done this, first thing that I need to do is make my blank round. I'm going to use the spindle roughing gouge to do that. Spin it around, make sure we're good. Make sure that this is square with it. And I'm going to turn the lathe on at about 2,000 RPM. I find that's a pretty good speed for me, but again, it's all about what you feel comfortable with. If you feel comfortable at a lower speed, by all means use a lower speed. Myself, I've done hundreds of these now, so I feel pretty comfortable with it. And we're just going to flat it off, take a couple of nice big bites. And once we feel like we're pretty close to round, we can check that we're actually round by leaning the back of the tool against the blank, and it feels like it's pretty smooth. Let's turn it off and just double check. We want this completely round. All right, so the shape of a top is going to look about like this. There's many styles of tops that you can turn, and this is a flat on the handle end, and it's 45 degrees or so, maybe a little bit less on the far end. So to get that far end, the bottom end of the top, I'm going to use the bowl gouge and shape that. So I'm going to position my tool rest so I can get that good angle on there. And I'm going to turn this at about 2100 RPM, but again, speed is up to you. You turn at what speed you feel comfortable with. And you'll notice I'm just taking a little bite to start with. I'm just bringing the cutting edge of this in at about the angle that I want to have the final angle of the top at. I'm just progressively shaving it down until we get to a point. So you'll notice I'm taking pretty big cuts to begin with. Now I'm almost to the tip, and the one thing that we want to do as we get close to the tip is slow down and take light finishing cuts. We want that tip to be nice and smooth because we want our top to spin nicely. If we've got a rough tip, then we're not going to get a good spin. All right, way to check and see if you've done a good job is just to touch the tip. If it feels like the tip's wiggling around under your finger, then you've done a bad job and you need to go back for another pass. Another thing you can do is just check the smoothness of this. In this case, it's pretty smooth. I could probably do one more pass on this, but I'm going to skip it. If it's not completely smooth, then you can take a piece of sandpaper to it. In this case, 400 grit's good enough because I got a pretty good finish. If you need to do some heavy sanding, it might be just an opportunity to practice your spindle cuts and get a nice smooth finish. All right, so at this point, I've turned the tip. The top is ready for me to decorate. In this case, I'm going to go pretty simple. I'm just going to make a couple of lines so that I can whip out a marker and color it. What I'm using to do that is going to be, again, this beading and parting tool. There's a couple of ways you can do this. I could use this tool. I could also use the skew chisel. But what I'm trying to do here is just make some indentations to sort of create areas for me to color in. I'm going to raise this to about halfway. I'm going to come in and try and get that point in at a 45-degree angle so I have a nice even divot in the side. I'm going to turn it about 2100 RPM, and I'm going to make three sections. Make 1 and 2. Now I have 2 nice areas to color in. I'm not going to color it quite yet, but I just want to get that in there before we start turning the waste away. Because once we make the back side of this top skinny, we're not going to want to come back and do it again because we would break our top right off. Alright, so this part is already pretty smooth, but I'm going to get that just a little bit smoother with the 3/8 beading and parting tool. And just shave just a little bit off in a planing cut. And now this right here is baby butt smooth. I'm going to work on getting rid of some of the waste. So I'm going to basically decide how long I want my top to be. And in this case, I want to get a second top out of this later. So I'm just going to make a little mark right there so I know how deep I'm going to go. And I'm going to start taking away some of the waste with this tool. So that's one of the ways that I can do it. I could also come and do this with my 3/8 bowl gouge and just kind of go back and forth, getting rid of the waste. Either way that you want to do it is up to you. This is just a quick way to do it. And what I'm doing is I'm rubbing the bevel, and then I'm raising the butt of the tool until it just starts to cut. And I try and keep that same angle going in. You don't want to go too deep because you'll get a catch. You don't want to go all the way deep because you'll be scraping, which is okay. You'll get there eventually, but it'll take you more time and you'll have a rough finish. I like to do this planing cut because it gives me a pretty good speed. So now I've got a lot of the waste turned away. And what I'm going to do is finish off the top side of the top using the 3/8 bowl gouge. Now you don't want to come in at this angle. Won't have much control that way. Now what you want to do is start closed. This is open. This is closed. Start closed. Find the point where you want the top to basically end. Make a mark. I'm going to make a mark right there. That's the top of the top where I want it to be. And now I'm going to take some bites off of here. With my gouge mostly closed. Now at this point, I need to decide what shape I want the top to be. I'm going to make this one flat, but you can make it sort of swept. You can make it all sorts of shapes. And this becomes a very personal choice. In my case, there's typically 2 types of tops that I like to turn. And this is going to be one of them. Okay, now I'm going to come over to this side. I'm going to get rid of some of that waste. I'm going to come back the other direction. Trying to establish a nice gentle shape to the top of it. A gentle transition into the neck of the top. So now I've gone a little bit thin here, and one of the things that I probably don't want to do is come back and make any heavy cuts to the front, or the sides, or even right here, because this neck here is quite thin, and I'm liable to break the top off or create a lot of chatter. So before I make this any thinner, I'm going to go ahead and make my lines on the top just like I have on the bottom side. Then I'm going to finish off the neck. Now again, I want to make sure that I don't go back. Just like a bowl, if you come back and turn the thin edge of a bowl, you're probably going to break your bowl. If I come up here and do some heavy cuts here, I'm probably going to break my top off. So at this point, this part has to be done. I can't really go back for any more. I need to continue turning towards the top of the handle and be done with the rest. Alright, so now I'm going to take a moment and color the top. I'm just going to trim up the very top of it here. Using this skew, we're going to scrape away the top of this handle. So we can color this part as well and then part it off. Alright, now I'm going to grab some markers. I'm going to go with a red, white, and blue theme. These are cheap markers. You can get these on Amazon for like 100 of them for 25 bucks. And they're just alcohol markers. They got two tips. You got a fine tip and a broad tip. And for this we'll use broad tip. The red, white, and blue. And do the handle red here. You can go high speed, low speed, it doesn't really matter. Very easy. Not at all difficult here. Okay, now to finish this, there's a couple ways to do it. One way is you could use some paste wax. I do like to use paste wax sometimes. Another way is that you can take a stick of wax, such as carnauba, like this one, and just rub it on the outside. And that'll put a friction finish on, basically. And then we'll buff that with a paper towel. And it'll give us some nice, shiny outside. So that's one way to do it. I'll do some more videos with other ways to finish. This is your basic top. This is a very straightforward, basic way to get into it. Produces a nice looking top. It's a great way to practice spindle techniques. And I'm just going to buff this with a little piece of paper towel. This one's slightly used, but it's good enough. Just going to buff it at high speed. And shine it up a bit. So you get some friction. That'll melt the wax and melt some of the color into the wax. Get a nice friction finish on it. top side the same. And don't push too hard, or you'll pop your top right off before you're done. You probably don't want to do that. Alright, so to part this sucker off, there's a couple ways to do that. In my case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this 3/8 beading and parting tool. Just get right in there. Create a little notch here, and then come back the other way and make the notch bigger. Until my top pops off, basically. Let's get our tool rest a little closer here. Dang, that looks good. Alright. There it goes. Might want to catch it. I'm kind of an idiot, so a lot of times I let them drop on the floor. You probably don't want to do that. Alright, so now my top is done. It's a nice shape. Looks pretty good on top. It'll spin well. Last thing I want to do is just finish off this little nipple at the top. I can just take some 220 grit sandpaper and rub that off. Now it's done. This will fetch about $5. Thanks for watching. That's about it.